further ado, I'm delighted to introduce Alison David from Farshore. So over to you, Alison.
Hi, hello. I'm just share my screen and try and get this this to work. Oh Lord. Sorry, I'm just trying to share my screen. Oh, I've done it. Good?
Yes, all good.
Good. All right. I'm sorry, everyone. Right. Thank you so much for having me. Yes, as Anthony says, I'm Alison. I'm a Consumer Insight Director at Farshore. So we're a children's imprint of HarperCollins book publishers. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share the findings of our latest piece of research, Storytime in School. We worked with 20 primary schools in England, and we recruited them through the UK Literacy Association. What we wanted to do was to see what effect being read to daily, just for the fun of it, would have on 7 to 10-year-olds and their reading for pleasure. So 3,000 children participated in this study. It was a really, really big one. I've got quite a short presentation. There are lots and lots of detailed findings in a research paper, which I'll share at the end. But I realised I couldn't go into all of them. So I've tried to pick out really the key points for you. So the first thing I thought I'd start with is, oh gosh, trying to get this to move on. There we go. Well, you're probably wondering why on earth a children's publisher did this research about schools. And it's because of our purpose, as you can see there at the top of the screen, which is to make every child a proud reader. So it's a big and bold purpose, but it really drives our business. And we aim to achieve it through two kind of key ways. We offer really broad portfolio, a really wide range of books, because we're trying to excite and interest every child, every interest. And I just put a few there to give you an idea. So to offer kind of ways into reading for every kind of child. But the other way is through investing in research, and that's what I do. So we're trying to find the barriers and the enablers to children's reading for pleasure. And we share what we know, because we're absolutely determined to get more children reading. And of course, we know that we can't do it on our own. So we share all of this insight to try to drive change forward, basically. So why is reading for pleasure so important? I thought I'd start with this because it's not always obvious. And I should say it's not always obvious to parents, but I'll come back to that. So reading for pleasure is choosing to read for enjoyment. It's not about the reading that children have to do at school or for homework. It's completely different from literacy. And why is it so important? Well, there's a lot of academic research, which I'm sure you've heard, and you know this, but children who read for pleasure do better in life. It's incredibly powerful. It has actually greater impact on their outcomes, so their educational success, than their parents' educational level, their socioeconomic group. It's really, really powerful. So they achieve more all-round academic success, even in maths, which is quite amazing. Emotional benefits are enormous. So enhanced well-being, happiness, reducing stress, increasing empathy, building resilience and concentration. All these things come from children who read for pleasure, for children who read for pleasure. So it's important academically, it's important emotionally. And when we think about how many children have got mental health or possible mental health problems, that's something to think about. And then, of course, it's important in other ways too. So the national curriculum in England lists reading for pleasure as statutory. We know that Ofsted are seeking evidence for it in their inspections, and the reading framework from the DfE that came out this summer is very much focused on it. So, you know, this is important on every level, but there's a crisis, a big crisis in children's reading for pleasure. So only a quarter of children read for pleasure every day or nearly every day, and we might define that as on 4 or more days a week. So that's 2022 data. In 2012, it was 38%. So you can see how much it's come down. Over the same time period, So those children who rarely or never read has gone up to 21%, and it was only 13% in 2012. So you can see the kind of trajectory there. Our National Literacy Trust finds over half of children say that they don't enjoy reading in their spare time. And there's an international study from PIRLS, Progress in International Reading Literacy, and they have found that only 29% of children in England say they enjoy reading, and that compares pretty poorly with an international average of 42%. So you can see why I say there's a crisis. So why don't they read for pleasure? Why don't they choose to read? So we've done a lot of research, as I said at the beginning. That's one of the things that drives us. And I'm distilling 12 years of work here when I tell you these kind of broad things that we've found. But what we have found is that a key problem is that many children simply think of reading as little more than learning, a task. It's a school subject. It's absolutely not something that they would choose to do in their free time. And you won't be surprised to know that they're, screen-based entertainment is the downtime of choice. So it's gaming, it's social media, it's YouTube, it's watching TV. It's not reading by and large. However, there is good news. We've found that there are 3 key ways to break down the barriers to this, and they work. We've tested them over and over. So children are greatly motivated by having wide choice of reading materials, and that kind of speaks back to what I said about the broad portfolio that we try to offer. By being allowed or being free to make their own choices of what they read. And you'd be surprised how many times they can't. If you think about reading schemes at school, if you think about well-meaning parents who say, don't read that My Little Pony book, you should be reading a classic book or something. They don't always get free choice of what to read. And the third one is being read to, reading aloud to children. So through our work with families, many families over the years, we've found that children being read to often is nothing short of transformational, really, even with the most reluctant readers. So there's a really clear link that the more often children are read to at home, the much more likely they are to read frequently themselves. The problem is, as you may know, that reading aloud to children at home is not prevalent. So fewer than half of 5 to 7-year-olds are read to every day or nearly every day by their parents. And by the time they get to 8 to 10, it's only a quarter. So I'm sure that you can see already the root of our storytime study. Could reading aloud to children daily at school be as transformational as it is in the home setting? So we did some initial research, and we found that only 24% of 8 to 10s are read to daily at school just for fun. And we also found that 30% of teachers say they don't read aloud to their class at all. Basically, story time is not prioritised. There's a busy curriculum. It's not prioritised. However, as I said, reading for pleasure is statutory on the curriculum. So what we wanted really was for children to experience being read to with no pressure, no expectations. What we hypothesized that if the focus is on enjoyment, children will begin to think of reading as something pleasurable and aspirational, and it'll be something that they'll choose to do. So that is very simple. That's what happens in the home. We thought, well, maybe this will happen in the classroom too. So we work with 20 primary schools, as I said, in England, around about 3,000 children, 7 to 10, so years 3, 4, and 5. 86 teachers took part. And there was 20 minutes of story time daily during the spring term this year. The other important thing to say, sort of echoing back to what I said about free choice, is that we asked that the children could be part of the selection process. So being able to sort of help choose or vote on which books would be read to them. We gave each of the schools that took part 200 new books as a thank you. And the other important thing is we specified that there was to be absolutely no teaching attached to this experience, no worksheets, no testing, no follow-up activities, nothing, no tasks at all, just story time for the fun of it. So a little bit about how we got the data, which is important. So teachers were given a pre and post questionnaires. So I said 86 teachers took part. We didn't get everybody filling them in at the end. We got 67. So that's what a lot of this data that I'm going to show you is based on. Children were also given pre and post questionnaires on Google Forms. So we received 1,558 children's questionnaires at the end, and 2,300 at the beginning. So we've got some really big numbers here. The other thing is, I think this is very interesting potentially for you. We placed extra focus on Year 4 children, so they're 8 to 9. And them alone we evaluated at the beginning and at the end of this of the spring term using the Salford sentence reading test. Don't know if any of you have heard of that. It's a nationally standardized test from Hodder Education, and it's to measure progress in reading age and in comprehension age over one term. So this is a really crucial age, this 8 to 9. So you'll know that in the very early stages of reading development, it's word reading accuracy that's the best predictor of reading comprehension. But then something really interesting happens to children between 8 to 10, and it changes. And at this age, listening comprehension becomes the stronger predictor of reading comprehension. So that's why we focused on Year 4 for this. And then at the end of the trial, we carried out depth interviews with teachers from 6 of the 20 schools. So we've got all sorts of data to share and very robust data. So if I go into what we found. So at the beginning, when we sent out those first questionnaires to the teachers, we asked them what they wanted to get out of the trial. And you can see some of the comments here. I should say there's so many more comments in the research paper, and I'll bring it to life more for you, but I've picked out a few. So they said they hope to develop a love of reading in the children, as you'd expect, they hope that the project would foster empathy, resilience in children, concentration, improve their well-being. They also said they hope that cultural capital would build from hearing all these different stories, that their imaginations would be fed, and of course that there'd be improvement in reading attainment as well. So, you know, there's some really big hopes for just one term. However, what I'm very pleased to share with you is that these things really did happen. So I'll talk you through what these graphs mean, these pie charts mean. So you can see the teachers' comments at the end of the trial, and the dark blue is showing you the responses where they agreed with statements for all of the children in their class. The bright blue is for some of the children and the grey is for a few. So for example, if you look at the chart on the left, you can see that 58% of the teachers said that all of the children in their class, their enjoyment of being read aloud to increased. In the middle chart, when they were asked about the children's confidence as readers, you can see 23% of teachers said it had increased for all of the children, 63% for some and 14% for a few. So here you can see that teachers also reported increased concentration, increased voluntary reading from the children, choosing to read, and increased range of books read as well. So, I mean, when you consider this was over just one term, just a matter of weeks, really, it's really arresting, I think. And it does make you question, and you know, what might the long-term impact be if this happened every single day, every term, every year? It's a very powerful thing. So I told you we had an additional focus on Year 4, and here are the findings, and these are truly astonishing, I think. So 18 schools of the 20 that we worked with finally submitted the reading ages in Year 4 at the end. All of these schools moved up from a mean score of average or age appropriate to well above average. All of them did. In addition, 60% of the children gained more than 2 months in reading age just by listening to stories. So this means their reading age increased more than their actual age over the term. So that's a value-added gain, I suppose. And astonishingly, 36% of children gained more than 13 months in reading age over just one term. And on average, it works out to be just under a year across the entire cohort. So that's reading age. This is reading comprehension. So we had 17 schools submit the comprehension data attainment at the end, and they all increased their average scores again. And here we saw a real shift towards excellence. So at the start of the trial, 49% of the children were well above average or excellent in the comprehension. So that was good. And at the end, it had risen to 60%. And there was some, as you might imagine, some really considerable variances among the schools in the study. But you can see some had absolutely astonishing results. So I'll just put two examples there. So the one on the left, you've got 31% of the children with pupil premium and 69% English as additional language. So they moved from 29% to 61% over a term, scoring excellent in comprehension, just by listening to stories, not having any pressure, just no worksheets, no nothing. So it does really show you the power of it. So well-being was another thing that really seemed to be positively affected. So teachers observed it was a very calming effect of story time on the children. Most of the children said the same, as you can see here, some big percentages. 91% of the teachers said they enjoyed it. They enjoyed reading aloud to the children, and they're under so much pressure. It was a kind of joyful part of the day for them. And 37% said it made them feel calmer too. So that was really, really positive. Children absolutely loved it, as you can imagine, you know, so you can see here, 77% at the end, so they want story time to carry on. Some really lovely comments. You can see them in the research paper again. I kept the typos because I thought they were so sweet, but it's made me like, I like the bottom one. It's made me like books a lot more, and I feel like if we don't carry on, then I will go back to hate reading. Also, I feel like it's made a lot of people in my class like reading. It's really, you can see how much it meant to children and what effect it had. What did the teachers say? So this is really, really interesting, and I think gets to one of the kind of cruxes of this project, really. So some said at the start of this trial that they really wanted to do it, but they felt very anxious about the time constraints and how they were going to do it. How would they actually do it? How would they find a place daily in the PAC curriculum? They also expressed anxiety about story time eroding the time for curriculum teaching, because that's what they're measured on, you know, as we well know. But what was interesting was they said that because they signed up to the study, it's kind of like a contract almost between us, the publisher, you know, if you do this, we'll give you 200 books, and they really wanted to do it. But they said that signing up to the study gave them permission, almost permission to allocate the time. And so there were two really important things that came through in the findings. Daily is a really critical success factor, and it's the routine that keeps children engaged. So if it's not daily, some children can forget where they are in the story and lose momentum, lose enthusiasm. So this frequency, this consistency is a crucial element. And some of these schools had tried to do story time, but they said that, you know, they might do it on a Monday and then on a Friday, and you've lost the children by then. They've forgotten what's going on. So daily is really critical. And then the other one is the choice that I've talked about already. So children's involvement in selecting what's read to them, having this feeling of input, being able to vote, to choose, to have a sense of agency, was really, really motivating for them, and it kind of engaged them with it. Obviously, an exciting selection of books to choose from is also an important aspect. But these are the kind of key things, I suppose, that came through. So why did it work? So it worked because it took the pressure off children. They're under enormous pressure. They know they're being judged and measured all day long. We know that when children are happy, when they're not stressed, they engage. And through this, they discovered a love for stories, a love for reading. And as I said, it worked because it happened every day. So the frequency embeds the habit. So there are, you know, we all know there are huge budget challenges in schools, but the financial impact of story time is absolutely minimal. You know, it has dramatic power to motivate children to and to increase their standards, very high returns really at low financial cost. Of course, teachers do need to have books to choose from at the start of each term, so I don't know, it depends on budgets for books, but there's nothing to say that they have to be new. I could almost imagine each class teacher reading the blurb on the back of 8 or 10 books at the beginning of every term and taking votes from the children as to which one's is read first, and that would set the class up and the teacher up for that term of story time. They could be books from the library, if they're new, of course, that's really amazing. But you can see that really, when you think of the impact and the benefit, the cost is very low. So the key cost or the key challenge isn't money, it's time. So it really is making time for story time. How to do it, does it need the backing of the senior leadership team? I would say it does. How to fit it in every day, it needs to be timetabled, and this curriculum, as we know, is rammed full. So does anything have to be dropped? What could be dropped? But I thought this is a really important sort of reminder. Reading for pleasure is statutory on the curriculum in England, so but story time isn't. You can see the tension there straight away, can't you? You have to deliver reading for pleasure. Well, reading for pleasure is not a subject. You can't teach it. It needs a different approach, quite obviously in the classroom. And story time is a great way to engage children with that. But it's not statutory. So there is a real tension between those two things. Should it be? Well, I think this is really worthy of debate. And you might expect we asked the teachers for their views. So 88% of the teachers favoured making it a requirement of the curriculum, and they said that it would mitigate that feeling of guilt that they have when they allocate time to reading for pleasure, and it would kind of ring fence it in the day for them. But that's not all of them. So the others who didn't say that said they felt concerned that if it was mandated, it would detract from the enjoyment of it, and just make it yet another task that had to be done rather than something that teachers and children chose to do. So, I don't know the answer to that, but I think regardless of whether it's mandated or not, if we think about the transformative outcomes, if every single child was read to every day, no child would be left out in this country, regardless of what was happening in their home situation. Remember, I said only a quarter of 8 to 10s are read to every day at home anyway. You can imagine straight away what an amazing impact it would have on children's attainment and outcomes. The positive impacts are made very clear, I think, by the fact that, as you can see at the bottom there, 91% of the teachers said they plan to continue with story time. So we feel it's made a huge impact. So thank you very much for listening. I hope I've given you some food for thought. There was a real skim. There are full research papers on our website, and you can see the address there. So maybe you have some questions. But thank you very, very much for listening. I need to try and stop sharing my screen. Did it?
Thank you so much, Alison. It was amazing to hear the voices of children.
Yeah.
It actually took me back to being about 5 or 6 and sat on the carpet. It was definitely, it's one of those memories I think that a lot of us have of primary school.
I know, precious moments, aren't they? But it's quite shocking when you think how few are read to now. I mean, maybe quite more children who are younger would be, but it's not enough.
We have had some questions come in, but remember, everybody, you can ask any question by using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. But the first question we have is around the type of books that were used in the study. Was it a mixture of fiction, non-fiction, poetry? What was the composition of the texts?
Well, so you remember I said that we asked that the children could choose or have input to choosing. So they chose all sorts of different things. They didn't have to be the new ones that we gave them. So we just, the books that we gave them from Farshore were just a thank you. They did use some of our books. They went for humour. They did, some of them chose non-fiction. I think that there was quite a lot of discussion with the teachers about what made a good book to read aloud. So, and the clear finding, I suppose, was that a good book to read aloud is one that the children have chosen. So it's that importance of choice again. It's really, really amazingly motivating for children. Humour they like, of course. The other thing was books with quite a lot of dialogue, which if teachers were confident, they could put on different voices and, so a few of the children said, I love it when Miss does, this voice or that voice. So yes, picture books too. So some of the children in the 7-year-olds still wanted picture books. So yeah, all sorts really. But I would say what makes a good book is one that the children have chosen. And also there's something around how long the chapters are really, because you've got 20 minutes. It's trying to find something that fits nicely in there. We asked the teachers to use their professional judgment as to when they would stop reading, and sometimes they manufactured cliffhangers and so on. But you can't, if you've come to the end of a chapter at 18 minutes, there's no point in carrying on for 2 more, is there? So it needs to be flexible, and the teachers know if they're sort of losing the attention of the children or whatever, that they could stop. But yeah, there was a lot of discussion around what makes a good book. Not an easy question to answer because there's different facets to it.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question we've had is around, were there any control groups in the study, or did you compare schools where there was no story time being undertaken with the ones in the recess?
No, we did all of the schools that we worked with were in this study. I suppose the control or the kind of comparison is the year 4, because that's the Salford reading test is nationally standardized. So yes, that is absolutely measured against the average of all children in the country. So that's the control, if you like, for year 4. I mean, I would have loved to have done that Salford test for all of the 3-year groups, but I can tell you it's astonishingly expensive to to administer that across that many children. So and as I already explained why we did year 4, because it's such a pivotal year with, it's a year where listening is so important, and it's a year where it's that kind of age where parents stop reading to children at the very point where they need to listen more. So
thank you. We've had some questions come in about the role of governors and what they can do to best support reading for pleasure. So the question has come in about, what do you think governors can do to support their schools to implement similar schemes?
Well, I mean, I think it's asked the question, isn't it? Maybe share the research, the highlights paper that I put the link to on the end of the screen. Get the discussion going, really. I mean, the thing is, the senior leadership team they will be aware, because Ofsted are looking for evidence of it, for reading for pleasure. But what I think the challenge is that not all schools know how to deliver it, reading for pleasure, because as I mentioned earlier, reading for pleasure is statutory on the curriculum. Okay, that highlights its importance. But how do you make that happen? Because you can't say we're going to have a reading for pleasure lesson now. You can't, it's not a delivery subject, like maths or literacy, because pleasure is an outcome. It's not a subject. Therefore, the whole thing around reading for pleasure needs a different approach and a culture building in a school. And I think that, so there's a lot more to it than just story time, but story time could kind of be a linchpin of building an RFP culture. But the question is really, how do we make time for it? So I think that governors could ask the question, remind the senior leadership team that this is statutory, that Ofsted are looking for it, and it requires a different approach. It does require some creativity and imagination, and basically encourage them to find the time to timetable it for every class every day.
Thank you. We have some questions that have come in regarding the kind of impact that this reading for pleasure can have. So one of them was, were there any improvements in issues such as attendance, for example?
We didn't measure that, actually, so I can't answer that. I'm actually hoping to go back to the schools at Christmas and do a kind of follow-up. So that's a really good question. I could include that. So thank you. But I mean, impact, you know, I hope that the slides I showed and the research paper shows clearly it has massive impact on children's motivation to read, their actual reading of choosing to read, their enthusiasm, reading wider, you know, increased attainment, better well-being. It's tick, 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 and it's just a, you know, just a matter of weeks. So you think we're only just getting started, really. Imagine if it happened all the time.
Thank you. And I agree. I think it'd be really interesting to see if there has been a shift in attendance. I think that's a fantastic.
Yeah, I think I would be there. I'd be there like a shot when I was a child. Oh, can you imagine if you remembered your school days and every day you were read to right up till you were 11? Magic.
A really interesting question is around whether you got any feedback on the time of day that children might prefer to engage with the pleasure for reading.
Yes. So again, as I said earlier, we wanted teachers to use their professional judgment. So it varied really by class and by teacher. Some of them did it after lunch to calm them down when they came back after lunch. Some of them did it first thing in the morning to set them up for the day. Some of them did it at the end of the day. I think flexibility is absolutely the key thing to do. I think that the children were looking forward to it. So some teachers said, you know, when they started to get tetchy or fidgety, they'd say, right, well, let's do story time now. So, and, you know, they sort of would cheer when it was story time. So I think teachers need to be given completely free rein and professional judgment as to when it happens in their class in the day, and it may not be at the same time every day. You know, some classes, the little ones might like it to be every day before home time, and maybe the older ones, it could be used sort of judiciously around, you know, as and when. But we didn't set that. We just asked that they could do 20 minutes a day.
Fantastic, thank you. I wanted to ask a lot of the questions we have about the role again of governors, and a lot of people in watching this will be governors. Really, we've had two very similar questions actually around what impact governors can have in terms of maybe engaging with young people in terms of reading. So, for example, would it be maybe a good idea for governors to go in and contribute by reading to young people?
That's a fantastic idea, isn't it? I mean, yes, this governors hasn't come up, but this kind of conversation has come up because when teachers are so incredibly busy and there's so much to do, some talked about maybe they could get the school librarian to come in and do the story time, you know. So yes, that's definitely possible. One of the interesting things, though, about doing it every day was that and I didn't put it into this short presentation, but you'll see it in the paper, was the impact it had on the relationship between the teacher and the children. So, you know, because it was the same person reading to them every day, it really, really built strong relationships and bonds. And the teachers felt that they began to understand the children a lot more, and also got an insight into what kind of books the children were interested in. So then they were able to recommend and sort of move this on and move their reading for pleasure forward. So there's a great advantage in it being the same person every day. On the other hand, the reality of life and if the curriculum is, I'm sure that you know, if governors could come in, and it might work quite well with the younger children, actually, with picture books where it's like one and done, you know. I mean, if you've got a chapter book and you go, it's a bit much if you know, some miss has got the voice, it's all right, and then someone comes in and tries to pick it up the next day. But I think perhaps with shorter reads, it could work really quite well. So yes, I'm sure teachers would love all the help they can get to try and find the time and the way to deliver this.
Yes, I know from speaking to a couple of my volunteers that they're really keen to get involved in this sort of
amazing
within the school community to help them really get to know the school and the pupils. On a similar note to that question, somebody has posted in the Q&A that since COVID, governors go in to read to young people, because so many children don't read or get read to
Yeah.
at home. And they've asked if there's any suggestions about how to engage wider stakeholders such as parents, carers, etc.,
yeah,
with reading.
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Yes. So what we found over the last 12 years of research is there's this shocking lack of awareness and information among parents about the the value of reading aloud to their children, and also actually about the joy of it. They don't kind of understand how much they would enjoy it if they did it too. So it's quite interesting, isn't it, when you think how very, very important it is for children's outcomes, but there's doesn't seem to be a kind of a way for parents to be told about this, right from the beginning. So I think that there is definitely a need to pass information to parents from schools, to talk about it, to explain that reading for pleasure is not literacy. I think lots of parents think that it is. They just think it's a subject to learn, and therefore once their child can read, it's like job done. I don't need to support them anymore. It's phew, that's it. And that's why we see this huge drop off as children begin to become competent at reading. Parents kind of step back, and this is the very age where they need to step up to it and try to show children that actually choosing to read is fun. So there's a shocking lack of information out there, and short of a national campaign, which would be amazing, I think the only way we can do it is each individual school needs to reach out to the community of parents and talk about this and raise its profile. And what I have also found with all the parents and families that we've worked with over the years is once you get them to try it, the parents to try it, they just realize what they've been missing, and it's just the joy that the parents experience as well as the joy the children do. So I think it's about trying to just get them started, and quite more often than not, they choose to carry on.
Yes, that sounds really amazing, because it's quite interesting. I said to my own parents that I was helping with this session, and they started listing all of the books that they used to read to me, and I didn't remember the plot of half of them, but it was a really nice
but
moment.
It's the greatest joy as a parent. It's such a positive thing on so many levels, for the relationship between parent and child, as well as I said, the teacher and the child. So we've got to get parents trying, because they just think it's that, reading, that's the school will deal with that, so don't they?
A suggestion has come through in the Q&A about perhaps book clubs, and if there was any thoughts you've had around these, that they could be run by non-teachers, so parents, carers, people from the wider community. Would you think that might be a possible avenue to encourage more reading?
Yes, absolutely, definitely. And you just reminded me of something, actually. Because I did want to say that, I was saying earlier that story time is a low cost kind of intervention. I know that there's the issue of trying to get new books in the budget for that. But what I was going to say was that schools could look at all the publishers, because publishers offer so many free resources. So engage with publishers and see what they've got, and I just wanted to give you for example, forgive me because I am from Farshore, but I just wanted to say, for instance, we have a Reading for Pleasure club for teachers. So how you normally have to pay to get an author into a school? Well, we offer 2 author events free every term. One for Key Stage 1 and one for Key Stage 2, and the first 30 signups get a free book. It's all completely free, and there's discount to buy books afterwards. So that kind of thing could be used as a springboard for Read Aloud. So for instance, we've got picture book, Tom Percival, Jack's Amazing Shadow. That's next week, I think. And then there's Dr. Ronks doing Amazing Bodies before Christmas. But that's just us, Every other publisher will have these things. So if schools really, will get an awful lot if they reached out to publishers to see what free resources were there as well, to try and help with the budget situation.
Brilliant. I know for one of my friends who is a primary school teacher, that is definitely something that she is looking at doing in the weeks and months ahead, is engaging with various publishing houses.
Yeah, brilliant.
Just even so young people can meet authors and maybe encourage and inspire them to become
absolutely. Yeah.
we have a couple more minutes, so I'm gonna just get through some of the last questions so that we cover as much as we can.
Okay.
I think this question was possibly answered in the presentation, but was there any work done on the comparison between children with English as a first language and those with it as an additional language?
So only kind of anecdotally, so not so when we captured the data, for instance, from the children, we didn't ask if they were EAL or but the teachers talked about that they'd noticed that children with English as an additional language had started engaging more, and so lots of anecdotal information. And then there's that hard data that I shared and if you look in the report, you can see the schools data, and they're anonymized, but you can see their results and the percentage of pupil premium and EAL. So it seems to work incredibly well, actually, for English as additional language, because of course you're just listening and absorbing, and the pressure's off. There's no kind of terror that you're going to be asked a difficult question. So some teachers said that the children asked way more questions than in an English lesson, just because they knew that it was safe. Quite interesting, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's that environment, that sitting together, sharing a story,
supportive,
as are human
sharing,
beings.
warm. Yes, and that's when you learn. Not when you're terrified that you're going to get it wrong.
Another question around impact was in outcomes around writing, whether or not
yes,
staff noticed that maybe pupils
definitely.
will
So some of the
more.
teachers said that the children were writing more. Stories inspired by the story time. Writing poems, just voluntarily doing these things. So yes.
Fantastic. And I think last question before we wrap up, was there anything in the research which you would offer as possibly a tip for staff who are helping reluctant readers who have dyslexia, for example?
I don't know. Nothing really came up in the research about that. Just the fact that being read to, again, I think it just takes the pressure off, really. But dyslexia, one of our sister imprints is Barrington Stoke. I'm sure you're familiar with that, but they specialize in books for dyslexics. So there's an amazing resource there if anybody's not heard of Barrington Stoke. But I think, for all reluctant readers who are challenged, children with attention problems, it's just some kind of magic happens when you're read to and the pressure's off. You can find your focus, you can just relax and just really engage with it. So it's very, very powerful. We need to get more children read to every day.
I agree, and I hope that people who have watched this session will go away, I'm sure they will, with lots of tips and tricks and encouraging research so that it becomes embedded in.
If anybody wants to email me direct, you can go through Governors for Schools. I'm very happy to share my email, and if there's any questions, because we really are determined to get more children reading. So
brilliant. Thank you so much, Alison.
You're welcome. We enjoyed talking with you.
Of course, it was lovely to chat with you. Not only, of course, for the presentation, but all of your and Farshore's work in this area. I just know from my own experience that so many people watching this will be able to take this away and share with their school.